this will lead off with the legislators here, and we're running short of time, but I think we can get through the last questions here. We all get pigeonholed because of certain types of legislation we champion. Yours was Senate Bill 529, I believe it was. Many years ago, you championed immigration reform in the state. You were in the Senate, I was in the House when that happened. So there's been no stronger proponent of ensuring that public dollars are only spent on legal citizens or those who are here illegally. Can you address the accusation that's been made that the charter schools are simply avenues for foreign investment in trade for visas and green cards? Now, if at surface level, I don't see you supporting a piece of legislation that's just going to be an avenue for people to come in and buy their way to legally be in this country.
You know, there are some things that I don't want to shirk the question, but there are some things you just don't waste a lot of time on. I mean, this is another one of those just, if you can't argue the facts, just come up with something so wildly crazy that no one can even begin to wrap their mind around it. I mean, Christian brought it up, all the things you heard in just the last week of the Chinese are taking over these schools. You guys are involved with it. Do Chinese own your school? I mean, we could go through this time and time again, but I think once you get to that point, I think hopefully all reasonable people will say, okay, they have now lost the argument if they're up to making these accusations. Look, I'll close with this because it has been a long evening, and I know so many of you have stood with us, and I really, really appreciate this. This stuff's extremely important. By the way, last time I checked, all 5 of us live here in Georgia. You know, we are Georgia citizens. We're not out-of-state plants that came in to support this thing. And I want to say something too quickly about my school. I send my children to a private Christian school, that's my choice. And I have to pay double because I pay my local taxes, of course, a lot of them. And here's what's interesting. And I sometimes wish that we really had this attitude. And I don't know if it's just because it comes from without getting too religious here, a biblical understanding of what we're supposed to do as citizens. But I went and sat down at the beginning of this year with with the guy that runs our school. And we have a little over 400 students at our school. My 4 kids are part of that. And we were talking about what it's going to cost for tuition. And he said, you know, the Cherokee Charter School has taken away, as a percentage basis, more students from us than it has the public school. Because you see, there are some parents who didn't want to put their kids in the traditional public school. They were paying pretty high tuition, and now they get to send their kids to the public charter school. He said, we've lost more kids because of that, and tuition is going up at our school. So it's directly impacting our school, me, who's having to pay more tuition, my kids, right? But the headmaster at our school looked at me and said, but you know what? You're doing the right thing, and I don't hold it against you. Even though it's hurting us, you're doing the right thing because it's about the kids and about the choices that are best for them and their parents. And I thought, wouldn't that be amazing if everybody in education had that same attitude, not about protecting your own little kingdom, not about protecting your own little monopoly, but actually sat down and said, you know what? Even if it hurts me, if it's better for the kids, I think it's the right thing to do. Imagine what we could accomplish in this state if instead of adults fighting adults over the government scraps that are on that table, if everybody said, you know what, I'm going to take a step back. And even if I don't get quite as much, as long as I know it's helping the children of Georgia, I'm willing to do it. That's what this amendment is about. That's what it's truly about. Ask yourself 3 questions. Because if you can answer these questions the right way, then your decision on November 6th will be very, very simple. Number 1, who's better at determining what's best for your child? You or the government? Number 2, which system works better? A free market system, where the person supplying a good or service has to meet the demands of the customer, or a government plan system? Government plan system where they tell you exactly what you get. And the third question I ought to ask yourself is, where do we want to be in 20 years? Where do we as a state want to be in 20 years? Do we want to have a system where every student in Georgia has the opportunity to match their interests, their abilities, their vocation with an education delivery system that fits them individually? Or do we want to be exactly where we are today and not make any changes? If you can answer those 3 simple questions, and I'm not telling you how to answer them, I think you can figure that out, you'll know what to do on November 6th. This is not a difficult ballot question whatsoever. This is fairly simple, fairly fundamental, fairly American. I obviously am going to vote yes and urge everybody to vote yes, and no one's paying me to do that. Because I think it's good for the citizens of Georgia, it's good for the kids and the opportunities that they don't have today.
Representative Coomber, closing comments, and if you could maybe address, how's the state going to pay for the charter schools? We're already looking at tight budgets and maybe a $250 million shortfall.
Well, we've already talked about the fact that we can do more with less in charter schools, and frankly, you know, don't intend to beat a dead horse, but I think that the proof is in the pudding. You know, we've seen it happen year after year. We're continuing to see it happen, and this is a system that we need to keep and reaffirm in Georgia. It's going to save us money. It's going to improve our economy all around. And just in closing, let me say, whenever you have a really strong political discussion on any issue, there can be a tendency toward almost a feeling or an air of mudslinging sometimes, and it can be very heated, be very personal sometimes. I want to say very clearly to anybody who will listen, we have great public teachers in our community, and I can't speak for everybody else, but here in Bartow County, we have great public school teachers, Floyd County as well. We have school board members who genuinely care about the students in our system, who I think really want to do what is best for those students by and large. And even Dr. Barge, though I disagree with him on this issue, he lives in my district and he's a friend of mine, and we disagree. I just want to point that out, because what I don't want anybody to take away from here is that we're here to bash people who are serving our children already in those either elected or hired positions in schools. But what I do want you to take away from this is it's more important that you make a decision based on real information than based on some kind of emotional intimidation, which is what we've seen happening in a lot of these debates. So please understand, I want you to think about it logically, and then I want you to really think about the children who are asking you for your help in approving an option for them in those systems that are failing them, and the systems where they're not getting what they need. And I'm asking you to vote yes on this amendment, November 6th.
Rich, closing comments, and if you or Tony could address something that was really, I think, embedded in the question that I asked Senator Rogers. There's a lot of accusations out there regarding foreign investments taking over a school system, specifically related to the school-owned school. If either one of you have any, I think it would be good to address that maybe in your closing comment.
Well, in closing, I would just like to say that I love my state. Georgia born, Georgia bred, and by golly, when I say my final farewell, I'll be Georgia dead. But we got 1.6 million students, 159 counties, 180 school districts, and of those 1.6 million students, they speak about 100 different languages. Each one of those students are uniquely different. We are making one of the biggest mistakes of our life if we continue to go down the path of putting a one-size-fits-all model being the only way we choose to deliver educational services in Georgia. I mean, the system that we have today serves a lot of people, and it serves a lot of them well. But there's a huge chunk of the population that needs something different. We talked about it earlier. Maybe it's a longer school day. Maybe it's more specialized instruction. Maybe it's just someone who just has to have a more artistic environment, or one that has to be more hands-on, more scientific, more analytical. Whatever it needs to be for that child, that's what we need to do. The school system that I grew up in as a child, it doesn't work for my two daughters. I would be one of the worst dads on the face of the earth if I simply tried to tell my kids, well, it worked for me, so therefore it's going to work for you. I'm asking you today, and for you to go and ask your neighbors, ask yourself, do you want more for your kids, or do you just want what you had? Now, if what you had was great, fine. But if in your heart of hearts, you can dig deep, and you still wish you had just a little something extra at whatever elementary, middle, high school that you went to, then give your kids, your friends, your neighbors opportunity to have a choice so they can get that little something extra going forward.
I'll address the Gulen fear, and I do call it a fear. I know everybody's tired, but I like to tell stories, so please tolerate this one more. I've got a mother-in-law that's 83 years old. She's on the computer every day. That's all she has to do, eat. Well, that's the point. She called the other day and she said, I don't have an appetite. And I'm really worried because I read on the internet that when your appetite goes, you're about to die. I'm not kidding. She was afraid about that. And so I first said through my wife, ask her if she's constipated. I'm sorry. There can be another reason besides you're going to die that you may not have an appetite, you know. I have worked here in Georgia for 6 years. And we have some schools that were accused of being so-called Gulen schools. I've watched those schools for 6 years. Those schools were in existence for 10 years. Fulton County schools, not the state, Fulton County schools approved those schools, monitored them just like they do their own schools for 10 years. But somebody found on the internet that since they teach Turkish, and since some of their teachers come from Turkey, they're Gulen schools, which sounds ghoulish to me. It's a good thing around Halloween, right? Well, now why would they hire people and bring them in from Turkey? Well, how many Turkish teachers do we have here? Then somebody may say, well, why are we even teaching Turkish? When I first came here, another one of our charter schools in Fulton County was criticized because they teach Arabic. In fact, someone who's well known in the community, I won't mention the name because everybody would know it in Georgia, called me and said, are they training terrorists up at that school? And I'm not going to kid you about this. He got in the newspaper. The name of the school was Amana. See, that throws people off too. You don't know what Amana means. Oh my God, that's a terrorist school. Amana is a good word. But they teach Arabic. And because the community heard, well, maybe they're training terrorists, people started getting out at the end of the parking lot with long-range cameras taking pictures of people coming in and out of the school. I guess they wanted to see if they were carrying AK-47s or bombs, but nothing ever happened. Just little kids, you know, and teachers. And this other school that Fulton County has closed, you know, they closed it on the basis of a lot of things, but the big thing in the community was, well, they were doing schools, they were bringing in these teachers from Turkey, and they were teaching the kids Turkish. Well, when it comes to teaching kids today, if you will read the recommendations of the United Nations, and knowing that we're a global economy now, there are several languages that the United Nations is saying that our students should be learning. Chinese, Arabic, Turkish. I'm sorry, Mrs. McCall, who taught me. The teaching of Latin is no more being pushed, you know. So this big accusation was made, and they ended up, because there was such a fuming in the community, they closed down the highest performing middle school in the state of Georgia. And were the parents upset? You bet. Now, are they Gulen or are they not? I'm not the judge, but I never worried about that. Because we had American citizens there who, I guess, if their kids came home and said, they're trying to turn my kid into a Gulen. You know, somebody would make some noise. Would you have said something if that was happening to your child? You know, they're trying to turn them into Gulens. But here was the ironic part, and I close with this end of the story. Going back to the Bible, there is a verse that says, before you try to pick the beam, or the little speck, thank you, the speck out of someone else's eye, you should take the beam out of yours. Well, we learned after that school was closed, the school system who criticized them for that spent $2 million in the past year, guess what? Recruiting teachers from overseas. I just don't see it.
Dr. Reese, closing comment.
Well, you asked us to think about why, or to explain why we're in favor of this amendment and why we are all working really hard to get it passed. And I guess the answer for me is that, number one, I'm a teacher. And number two, I'm very competitive. We have a revolution in educational opportunities. A teacher's dreams has been provided to us by information technology. And we can now teach kids in the most individual way that is, again, it's a teacher's dream. Teach kids in the way that appeals to them, that works for them, for each child. And we can do that efficiently and effectively and at a lower cost. So that's possible, and that is sweeping the country. Now the competitive part. The folks who are opposing this amendment want to put a firewall on the border of Georgia, and they do not want to let this educational reform or this change, they're threatened by it, they don't want to let it into the state. Now, as an adopted Georgian, can I call myself that? A Yankee who's come to really love Georgia too. Right. I can't stand that. I can't stand what it's going to do to our economic development. But more than anything else, we have the number of kids who quit high school in Georgia every year can fill the Georgia Dome. And that breaks my heart. And if we are going to put a firewall on the border of our state and not even give something that looks so good a chance to give all those kids in the Georgia Dome an opportunity at a life, it's just sad. It's sad and it's wrong. And that's why I'm doing it. I want Georgia to take advantage of this new thing that's just so positive and developing and do it for the kids. That's what we're all here for.
Well, can we give our panel a good round of applause? They've taken the time to be here.
You all were announced the final later, and I'll applaud you.
I think it's been very informative, and as a disclaimer, neither McDonald's, Burger King, or the four-way provided any funding or endorsements of tonight's forum. Thank you all so much for being here. We're 2 weeks from the election. And one thing I'll leave you with this. As you consider this, I know many of you in the room here became very outraged by the government takeover of health care. We were upset by the so-called Obamacare because it is the government totally controlling every aspect of your life when it comes to health care. They choose what type of plan you're going to have, if you have a plan, what doctor you would go to, or even what type of health care you could receive from that plan. But many of us that were opposed to Obamacare are totally acceptable of an education system that follows the exact same model, to where the government decides where your child goes to school based on your address, when they go to school, and what they learn, with very few avenues to leave. This amendment simply allows an appeal process for parents who are trapped in failing schools and ability to provide a better education for their children. Thank you all for being here. Remember, please go and vote November the 6th. God bless.